Crisis. Here we go. Just some of today's biggest stories. Well, I'm delighted to say, to help me tackle them over the next couple of hours, my panel, columnist for Unheard, Alice Grant, and commentator for Young Voices, Connor Tomlinson. Welcome to you both. We shall hear lots from both of you very, very shortly. Now, I can now go to my panel, who've been listening intently, not taking any notes because they've got brilliant brains that can gather all of this stuff up. Alice, first of all, quite a list. Government wrong on masks, get your act together on air purifiers, cut the green levy, maybe do something on VAT, and don't go for pay freezes. That's a Tory MP. Yes,
no, I agree with Robert on so many issues. In fact, I think what he said about masks particularly struck me because it sounds to me very unhygienic, in fact, to have masks placed on children for 6 hours a day. And I think the air purifiers would be, in fact, much more logical and rational to install in schools than policies which will harm children's mental health, which will affect their learning, and which ultimately could even be dangerous to their health.
Yeah. But on the politics of it, Connor, as well, I mean, in addition to what Alice just said, Halfon quoted Jonathan Van Tam, the children's minister, what have you. Is this part of the backbenchers getting frisky, saying to Boris Johnson, you know, A, you're getting detailed things wrong, but B, you're on borrowed time?
Well, I'd love the evidence-based appeal based on the schools, of course. I mean, for example, when he said about the children with learning difficulties and that, one of the main things that the pandemic's been really hard for is people with autism, for example. I don't understand how mandating masks in schools on the side of the teachers' union is going to really help children with learning difficulties that not only find it very uncomfortable and, as Alice said, very unhygienic, but also trying to understand audio-visual cues from their teachers and their peers. It's going to be terrible for that.
It's like Jack Straw and why people shouldn't wear masks when they come into surgeries, as he said all those years ago.
Who would have thought a couple of years ago that you'd be mandated to wear masks in a bank? I mean, it's quite funny, really.
Well, if there's medical advice that supports it, which Halfon clearly said, and you quoted again, Alice, the medical advice is not there.
Exactly, especially when we're talking about 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, which this policy is targeting here. I mean, their capacity for transmission of the virus is negligible. Yeah. So why on earth are they being inflicted with these policies? It seems to me as though, you know, perhaps I mean the psychological effects here will be ones that I think are far more damaging. And why isn't the government looking at them?
You're going to stick with me for the whole programme, which is excellent news, and we'll chat more about that. I want to finish on his last point. Cost of living, Connor first, is going to be the political crisis in 2022. And Halfon didn't sound terribly confident that whether it's Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak, that the ducks are in a row.
Well, the inflationary conduct seen under Rishi Sunak with the mass printing to make up for the furlough scheme has put us in this situation. And then the idea that he's said, oh, the government can scrap the green levies, but also that it isn't the government's fault. I mean, you put price caps on energy, so that means that you're artificially inflating the market, you're picking winners and losers, and then you abolished all of the gas and oil drilling in the North Sea. If we tap 10% of those reserves, we did enough for 50 years. What's going to bring the cost down isn't mucking about with the VAT, etc. It's repatriating the manufacturing. We saw that in America, and that'd do much better for the UK.
The final brief thought from you. You said in America, James Carville famously said to Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. If Johnson really wants to sort out his poll standing and his party's poll standing, it's the economy, the economy, the economy.
Yes, I agree entirely. And what we've seen is debt has been spiralling out of control thanks to the pandemic and the COVID measures taken by this government. And really it will affect our generation. And I know so many young people who are very concerned about the cost of living, including myself, because I don't understand how this is sustainable for the future, all this money that's just being spent.
Alice and Connor, thank you both very much indeed. We shall have more and more and more from you as the programme progresses, but that's it just for now. Listening to that, Connor and Alice, intriguing on, we could call it, it'll be over by summer, but we could call it now.
Definitely, and God bless the professor for speaking some common sense to everybody. But the problem is the message of this sort of common sense perspective on live with COVID, etc., isn't really getting out there. You've got the BBC's initiative, the Trusted News initiative, that are suppressing information based on who they can define as being vaccine hesitant. That's partnered with the government. And you see the government picking their particular experts like Jenny Harries and Neil Ferguson, who time and time again the SAGE modelling is always wrong. So it's just that they're picking experts, unlike Dr. Sakura, who want to justify their pre-foregone political conclusions. It's politics versus medical.
The other thing I found intriguing is he agreed with me about staffing levels, whether it's cancer experts or COVID people, nurses, consultants, and what have you. That's up to the government. But you can't wave a magic wand and suddenly train someone in 5 minutes who takes 7 years to train.
No, exactly. And right now we're at a time where the backlog of cancer patients who need treatment is ever growing. And we need health professionals who are going to be there. And, you know, are we going to have this amount of uncertainty and panic over just a mild cold for how long? Because that's what Omicron is, really. It's not, there's no evidence to show it's very serious. And yet the government have always gone to the extreme measures already. So it's unsustainable.
Very, very quickly, both of you, do you believe that the NHS is still under pressure, under threat from the Omicron wave?
Not from the Omicron
No,
wave.
it's not. No. Omicron peaked at the 21st of December anyway, in terms of cases in London, which is, you know, the hub, 9 million people living here. So I don't see how the NHS could be overwhelmed.
It's going to be from government policy, because if you're going to cut 200,000 patients at the exact time where you've got a massive backlog, sorry, not patients, staff, because they won't have the vaccination, well, it's kind of self-defeating. So the NHS is under pressure, and then you're ditching all of the key workers that you're meant to be clapping on the doorstep every Thursday.
Stay exactly where you are. We shall have more from both of you later. For the time being, Connor and Alice, thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted to say that Connor and Alice are with me live now to talk about that and whatever they choose to. Let us start with COVID, because this is year 3. But forget the science for a moment, the politics of it. How have both major parties handled it?
Well, it's interesting because what I see is a series of really broken promises. And this all began, as you said, nearly 3 years ago now, being told that we'd only be locked down for 3 weeks to flatten the curve. And it has drawn out and become just a non-stop, incessant...
No defence in saying as circumstances change, like John Maynard Keynes, I changed my mind?
Absolutely not. I mean, John Maynard... I wouldn't defer to John Maynard Keynes for anything to do with sense or morality, Alastair, because his politics and personal life
Stop
are
marking
awful.
classical music.
Well, I don't know about that, but OK. Yeah, no, I don't think there's much of a defence of lockdowns, etc. And as you said, both political parties handled it identically, actually. Labour were just
no
more
opposition
hawkish.
from Labour. It was
Well, the key
ridiculous.
thing about Labour, and I got cross about it earlier on in the year, and Wes Streeting, I think, is making a better fist of it now, but it's early days, is that the entire Labour thrust was you should have done X earlier. It was never you should do Y instead, or seldom.
And we've seen across Europe such a different reaction to and response to the COVID pandemic. I mean, obviously, you've got nations which have gone to complete totalitarianism, like Italy and Spain. But then you've got Sweden, who handled this with such common sense. Not
But Sweden is top of the pops. I know your magazine has written a lot about it, but gone up, down, all over the place. I mean, Sweden wasn't a template for perfection.
No, not at all, not by any means. But I mean, what I'm saying is that there were multiple ways to respond to this pandemic, and our government has chosen a certain way, which I do not think was the one that was most rational, nor the most effective, as we've seen. I mean, we've locked down 3 times, and there's still constant panic and constant scare in media, propaganda all the time. And you look at other nations which have handled it much possibly better, like Japan and Sweden.
And then the guy in charge of it all gets forced into a position where he has to resign over a clinch, Matt Hancock.
Yeah, well, it's nice to know that someone's love life was thriving under lockdown, wasn't it? I mean, you had, what was it, Rosie Duffield as well, Neil Ferguson, and now Matt Hancock. And it's almost like they're not really abiding by the laws they lay out for us. And I want to jump on Alice's point quite a bit as well, because if you're going to compare the state studies, well, you've got the American states like New York and Los Angeles, who are massive lockdown hawks, who have pushed people, elderly people into nursing homes, COVID patients, killed them off. Whereas you've got places like Florida, who are using preliminary treatments like monoclonal antibodies, making them widely available. And at the same time saying no school closures, no mask mandates, no vaccine mandates, no lockdowns. They've got an elderly population, high population density. Guess what? Their cases are relatively fluctuating, but death statistics absolutely low. So there are other alternatives.
I think the most sinister thing is that we've only heard one particular narrative parroted by the political establishment, which seem to be in the pockets of these sage medics. And where is their evidence? I mean, it seems to be very odd that they've really enjoyed the controlling aspect of all these restrictions.
I tell the other thing that struck me. If you were to write this as a political novel, which both of you are more than capable of doing, I'd suggest that one of the biggest crises came because the very, very top advisors and 1 or 2 ministers told the nation what they can and cannot do,
It's just
and
unbelievable.
promptly broke every rule in the book, not least over funny hats and silly Santas.
Indeed, no.
Inconceivable from a bunch of grown-ups.
Well, they threw out the Great Barrington Declaration, and it's quite interesting as well how, if you look at the AIDS pandemic in the 80s, for example, Dr. Robert Malone, who developed the mRNA vaccine, he was on the complete opposite side.
This is the herd immunity thing.
Yes, and this is the opposite side to this to Anthony Fauci, who's currently the chief physician in America. And Anthony Fauci got everything about AIDS wrong. Dr. Robert Malone got it right and developed mRNA vaccine.
Alice is giving you a death stare.
But look, no, I think you're right.
Oh, it was the
actually,
stare of agreement.
Yes, yeah, the thing. Well, if you look at
usually elicit that
Professor Neil
response with
Ferguson as well, his track record absolutely unbelievably wrong on so many occasions.
He's the big modeler who also got into trouble over a
Exactly, and these Imperial
personal
College
issue.
models themselves, in fact, have been proven to be very dubious. So why is our government following?
We were going to talk about US politics as well, but alas, we've run out of time. But we'll do this again. I've enjoyed it, and it was also very, very enlightening. For the time being, thank you both very much indeed. Listening to that with me, Alice and Connor as well. See, here's the problem. I was very sympathetic to the arguments about leaving the European Union because I thought it was a basket case. But I was never persuaded that there was an immediately workable plan in place. He's just proved I was right.
Well, the thing is that Brexit was a golden opportunity, I feel, to take back control of so many of our industries, and that hasn't been delivered. I think the fishing industry...
But is it, as he said, Boris's fault, or is it you just can't do it?
It is, because, for example, let's take the fishing industry, for example. Boris could have so easily decided to rebuild and re-energise our deprived fishing coastal communities. We have 186 coastal MPs. Where were their voices when it came to taking back control of our waters? Right now, we have 1,700 EU vessels in British territory waters right now, plundering our fish, 8 of which are super trawlers, which cause enormous environmental damage. And no one is speaking up about this. There is
And
an
talking of
opportunity
super
here for
trawlers
jobs.
on the boat people, it's not boat people anymore, it's trawlers, converted trawlers. We no more have control of our borders as far as the European Union is concerned as fly to the moon.
This is part of the question of why Brexit sometimes get bogged down in dry policy conversations. The main point, the ethical point of all of this is take back control. It's a question of national sovereignty, whether it's migration, trade, etc. And this is why the European project is a pipe dream. You can never have a unified Europe. I'm with Peter Hitchens on saying that the European Union is Germany by any other means. You've got this German unification concern, whereas Britain's always been little Englanders, every man this castle.
If trade really kicks off, which many people say, Hamish McRae's written a brilliant piece in the Mail this morning, it's going to be big trade next year. Will that sort it?
Well, it will certainly deliver on some of the promises, because we do want to be an outward-looking nation. The European Union obviously is only very concerned with France and Germany, principally. So I do believe that trade, there's a lot of opportunities there, but I would like to see more promises actually enacted, especially ones regarding our communities here in Britain, manufacturing industries, fishing. There's potential. We should really take it.
I hope we have a chance one more time before the end of the programme, but I can't promise. We shall see, because we have to break off. But for now, Alice and Connor, thank you very much indeed. Brilliant stuff from my two guests there. I hope you agree. Food for thought. Time now for Food for the News. Sitting with me throughout all of that, from the top of it, have been my two lovely guests, Connor and Alice, and I've asked them to come back in to reflect on that and so much more, facing you and the rest of the world as we move deeper and longer into 2022. And contrary to all of that, which I've just said, you said to me when you knew were coming on the programme that you really wanted to talk about Afghanistan. And I said, it's done and dusted. And you said, no. The significance of Afghanistan and Britain's place in the world and the state of our alliances.
Well, definitely. One, as we've seen during COVID, all of the civil servants working from home, they neglected a lot of their duty while they were meant to be dealing with the crisis, getting people out. Again, Dominic Raab was raked over the coals for being on holiday, etc. Failures on both sides there. But also, we've deferred most of our power across the world, and it's mainly because they had most of the troops stationed there, to America. And there's a lot of questions about Joe Biden's competency, both with domestic and foreign policy. Now, with that vacuum provided by America and the UK in that global sphere of influence, China's moved in. They're using their Belt and Road Initiative, which is an infrastructure loan upgrade system that snatches up nations in the Middle East and Africa that really need roads and power, etc. They're moving in, and now they're taking the largest lithium deposits in the world when they're making 80% of our batteries.
Basically exactly the same when we were building our empire 200 years ago.
Well, it's very unfortunately, it's very similar with the sort of... Well, that...
Like,
and,
that's the thing. China is a very dangerous communist nation, and it should be under severe scrutiny, and I simply don't see that from this government at all. In fact, I see pandering to China a lot by Boris Johnson, which is sinister.
The fascinating point. Do you, therefore, he started the conversation and we can take it where we want to, but that's an intriguing point, because I was saying to Robert Olds of the Bruges Group, if we can sort trade, then almost anything else seems okay. But with China, the world's second biggest, perhaps one day soon biggest economy, you're saying there are moral issues here that mean that we have to gird our loins a little and draw our horns in.
Exactly. No, there are so many human rights problems. But even leaving that aside, if we look at, for example, the recent fanatical green agenda which Boris is pursuing, the UK accounts for only 1% of global emissions, and yet China is there building coal-fired power stations, one of the biggest polluters in terms of countries. And so far, there's nothing being said on that, and yet it's going to be the British people, especially the poor.
I don't dispute that, Alice. There's a different argument then. I'll bring you in. She's saying it's a moral argument as well. It may be the biggest economy, it may be the worst polluter, but we need to be cautious who we trade with, because they are not nice, good people.
I agree. If free trade is not reciprocal,
that is
it's
cutting
unfair.
off your nose to spite your moral face.
I disagree. China has got its tendrils in academia. We have become so reliant on it for manufacturing, and especially pandemic PPE supplies. They've outpaced Germany as our main... And as well, as you said about the green agenda, right? When they build these coal-fired power plants, 252, it increases global emissions by 16% by 2030. So we're going to cut 1% of global emissions by 2050 at the economic expense. It's insane. Meanwhile, as much as we're saying, the Uyghur genocide is going on, we're investing $500 million in a joint nuclear power venture with the Chinese government. That's a definite national security threat on our own soil. Yeah. So we are committing environmental suicide as well as the TPP. You said about
final point on this, and I'll bring you in as well, because I know you care and you've written about it as well. You've got, I mean, not quite the bright young things in the Conservative Party, but you have, and actually Dan Jarvis as well in the Labour Party, who's served in uniform. You've got people like Tom Tugendhat and Tobias Ellwood who care passionately and deeply about this. They are on the government's case as well.
Yes, the China Research Group I particularly like. Yes, it's so important. I think we should definitely be looking into things, and as you said, we're making these deals, these backroom deals. I was absolutely scandalised by Matt Hancock creating these PP contracts, knowing that it was slave labour, North Korean slave labour being used to make PP.
John Redwood said just the other day as well, the lateral flow test plastic things, predominantly from China.
I'm so glad we banned plastic straws, when they're done.
Yes, exactly.
53 million masks.
All right, two of you bright young things. What did you make of Robert Olds on Brexit?
I thought he spoke about very many important issues. I mean, we left the European Union in order to pursue an independent, sovereign future. And whilst I think there have been such great progress in terms of trade, I don't think we are still seeing the potential which Brexit
Do you share my disappointment or his anger?
I'm a bit angry. I was very, very passionate about Brexit, and as I could see how much it could empower us and empower our nation, and I don't think that's been fully realised.
Some of the points I put to him, and I hope I did it calmly, is that even the bits that were in the oven-ready package, realistically, were not doable.
I agree with you. You're never going to get to appease both sides of the Northern Irish border debate. It's basically impossible.
And he kept banging on about Sinn Féin quite rightly, and they are in the ascendancy.
They're detestable, yes.
But unless you can get a deal that both sides agree with, Good Friday Agreement, bye-bye.
Exactly.
In which case the Americans won't play ball.
It was always going to be an issue, and as well with Biden being what some people disparage him as plastic paddy, of where he clings very hard to his Irish heritage, even though there's not much going back, and so he disparages Britain. We're on the back foot now dealing with our predominant trade partner instead of President Trump. So it's very frustrating. This is why it has to be, when you're never going to have a perfect oven-baked policy deal, it has to be a question of national sovereignty. Was it morally right for Britain to leave an imperial project by Germany? Yes. We are never going to be a unified Europe because we've got too many differences. Britain believes in the individual person, Germany believes in the apotheosis of state.
It just struck me listening to you, both of you, on that. Is this a generational thing almost? Because I can remember I sat in Belfast when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. I interviewed the lovely late Mo Mowlam about it all. And I remember seeing Gerry Adams and other leaders of the Sinn Féin IRA sitting there smiling and what have you. That was a long, long time ago. Is relative peace something that may have lulled your generation into a false sense of security about Northern Ireland?
Well, I mean, we're living in such a different time, and I think since Brexit, a lot has changed. To be honest, we are a different nation. And now, especially being independent, circumstances have completely changed. So,
but does that warrant risking the Good Friday Agreement?
Well, I think morally speaking, you have to put it somewhat in contention. I've never been particularly naive to the risks, just because I've got Irish family who've always spoken about that sort of stuff. And I think I was born on the day that the IRA bombed the Thatcher, the hotel where she was at.
Brighton.
Yeah, so it's always been somewhat of a thing in the back of my mind. But again, it comes down to, OK, on principle, politically, are we too different from Germany to be marching across the imperial European project? Yes, so we should have, it was always going to be an issue. But is it worth risking that contention to get out of that massive imperial network? Yes.
Yes, I agree.
Do you want to risk a guess or a gamble on what will happen on Northern Ireland?
I think there'll have to be renegotiation at some point, to be honest, because the situation is very complicated, and I don't think Boris did a very good job at negotiating, or Theresa May, perhaps, seeing as so much of his deal was really just hers rehashed.
And is there also, final one on this, perhaps you come in on it as well, Alice, if you want, but Connor particularly, is there a political significance in, I mean, David Frost's resignation was deeply, profoundly significant politically, everybody knows that, but giving that brief to Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, rather than another middle-ranking minister?
Well, it's looking to expand the scope of a post-European Britain trade system. The problem I was going to say about linking back to our earlier discussion about China and the green agenda and that, we're joining things like the TPP, which sound great in principle, an everyone but China club. But if you look at the clauses in there, for example, you're obligated to buy from certain companies within those member groups, and that includes on things like oil. So as soon as we jump out of fossil fuels by 2050, we're there on the hook for lawsuits from companies to countries that we can't get back. And they did that with TransCanada, and the US was on the hook for billions from the taxpayer. So at the same time as we're doing this post-Brexit levelling up agenda around the world of global Britain, well, we're shooting ourselves in the foot environmentally and economically.
What's it look like out there generally? As we all agree, I mean, polls make great headlines, but polls are merely a snapshot of what people felt yesterday or the day before when they were asked, not even today. And the Mail has a very deep and powerful poll today in the sense that it shows the Conservative Party in deep trouble, but the Labour Party not quite reaping all of the benefits. It shows Boris Johnson in deep trouble, but Sir Keir Starmer not yet reaping all of the benefits. Where do you think we are right now as we enter 2022 politically?
I think, honestly, many people are very disillusioned and perhaps apathetic as well towards the political establishment at this point. I mean, for so many years, we've seen so much uncertainty from the Conservatives, not just now with COVID and never really knowing what's going on, but also I remember in Brexit, there was so much uncertainty there as well. We've seen this pattern. And obviously the Labour Party, I feel, are completely unelectable. But the Conservatives...
Even after the reshuffle?
Yes, yeah.
Especially after the reshuffle.
Why do you say that?
Well, they've ratified back again around the rejoin, remain.
No, it's a tired argument, the remaining and rejoining, and it's never going to go down well with the British people, which are obviously so pro-Brexit. And the Conservative Party really was a beacon of hope for so many. I remember the election, so many people had so much hope and were so eager to see what Boris and how he could transform the nation. And instead, COVID hit, and I mean, in terms of both the economy, we're going to have a long time recovering from this. So I think the Conservative Party really need to find those Conservative values again and have a more positive approach, because all we've seen is such negativity. And
we get accused here on GB News across the piece of Boris bashing, and I'd be the first, and I'm sure Dan and other friends would say the same. Not Boris bashing. We're simply trying to capture a scenario where folk out there are saying, like, tell it like it is, there are real problems, and you've both said that. Do you think, nevertheless, he is untouchable? Or do you think he is in trouble as the leader of his party?
I think he's currently deciding whether to go with a whimper or a bang. If he would have tried to go for...
Oh, he decided to go.
Well, no, I think it's whether or not how long he can cling on. Because if he would have gone for another lockdown, I think Labour would have actually felt it's so comfortable to rebel now they've got the precedent of vaccine passports. He would have been out on his ear with letters from the 1922 Commission saying, hey, call for your resignation, you're politically untenable. Now we're looking at investigations to the Downing Street parties, particular malfeasance by his ministers in terms of PPE contracts and with Pfizer and Moderna. And then you're also looking at, in the future, the economy. As you said earlier, the economy's stupid. If things start to wane, as we're seeing inflation here, it's a tax on the poor, especially the Red Wall, who are like, we're going to lend you our vote for Brexit, please make economic conditions better. Is he just going to go quietly into that good night?
But top of any critique of brand Boris is bounce.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think I don't trust Boris one bit, to be honest. And I'm a conservative at heart in terms of my values and my principles. And I do not think that this party represents me or many other people who voted with goodwill and good faith, thinking that Boris would take the nation into a new chapter where we would return to our conservative principles and see economic growth. And instead, Rishi Sunak, I feel, has been a bit of a disaster, just throwing around money and all this. So yeah.
Ooh! Takes me to my last question, and I'm being told by James, our producer, that we have a minute left. I firmly believe that one of the main reasons that Boris Johnson is probably more secure than some of the critics suggest is that whether they're good or bad, there is no one single candidate around whom sufficient numbers of Conservative MPs can unite.
Perhaps.
Connor? Alice? Connor?
I think
It's interesting. I mean, even
Ladies
just
first.
with the last extension of the Coronavirus Emergency Act, there were so many members of the party who rebelled against that, MPs in Parliament. So Boris, I think, is, there's a tenuous, perhaps, grab on power, I think. So,
Yeah, you go.
but then who would...
You've got 30
replace
seconds.
him?
Okay, I think the Whitehall apparatus are going to ratify around their frontman. Gove seems to know where the bodies are buried, so despite the fact that he is justifiably disliked by the public for his education and housing policies, I think the party is going to push him as their safe bet.
It'd be very
It's
interesting.
absolutely fascinating, and I'm long enough in the tooth to remember that, of course, it's never Michael Heseltine. It's always more likely to be a John Major. And at the time, how they said profoundly, I was even interviewed by CNN in America to try and explain to them not what had happened to Margaret Thatcher, but who John Major was. It's a real pleasure seeing both of you. Join us again. Let's do it one more time. Thank you very much indeed, Connor and Alice.